Now that we have reread the potatoes section together, it's time to go ahead and write our gist statement. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the slide. And let's take a look at what the prompt says. What was the potatoes section mostly about? The fact that it says mostly about, that tells us that, again, we are going to be writing a summary, a gist statement. And the actual, I've got the beginning of our response here. Go ahead and space that down. In the potatoes section of the Omnivore's Dilemma, and that's where I stop because we're going to add in having you generate the next section. So before we figure out how to introduce the author, because if you'll remember on the first one, let's go back and look at the first one, which was up here. In the first two paragraphs of the Omnivore's Dilemma, the author, Michael Pollan, we have three parts: rephrasing the question, introducing the text, introducing the author. So in this case, let's go back down here. We've got the rephrasing the prompt, introducing the text. What we don't have is introducing the author. So I'm going to teach you how to do that next, and we're going to be using some academic language to do that. And here it says switch to the next slide because that's going to take us to a list of some different academic words we might want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over now. This is from a book called They Say, I Say, and what is in this book are lists of what are called sentence stems, and those are parts of sentences that you use to add to your writing or add your writing to these sentence stems to produce academic writing. We're going to look only at this part right now, which is capturing authorial action. Capturing authorial action just means capturing or saying what the author is saying. That's all that means. And so really this means let's just look at ways to introduce what an author is saying using a paraphrase or a gist statement, which is what we're doing. So let's take a look at what's going on here. Each of these starts with a letter X. The X represents where you would put the author's name. So in this case, our author is Michael Pollan. In my first response, I introduced him as Michael Pollan. And so each of these responses afterwards, I can either write Michael Pollan or I can write Pollan. So in this next one, I'm just going to use his last name because if we say his first name and his last name too many times in a row, it's really redundant and then it starts to become bad writing. So we're just going to use his last name in this case. And we're thinking about what are we being asked to do? We're being asked to say what was the main idea or the gist of the potatoes section. And remember, the potatoes section was talking about how toxic the production of potatoes is in the mass farm. So let's look at a couple samples of things that maybe we might look at. So we might say Pollan acknowledges that's something. We might have Pollan argues that's something. Some of these are going to fit better than others. So Pollan complains that's probably not a really good fit in this case. Pollan observes that seems like that might be a good fit. Pollan celebrates the fact that, well, that's definitely not a good fit in this case. Pollan suggests that. So you see how each of these are starters of something that we might want to use in our writing. So we're going to go ahead and select one right now. So I'm scrolling down the list. I think observes that seems like a really good fit for us to try in our writing. So Pollan observes that. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the writing section right here. All right, so here we have it, the very beginning part, the rephrasing of the question in the potatoes section. We've got the introduction of the text of the Omnivore's Dilemma, comma, and then I'm going to go ahead and get my cursor here and change it away from the italics so that I can write in the standard font. And I'm going to go ahead and put in our statement of our author. So Pollan observes that, but now we need to answer that question. What is Pollan observing? So Pollan observes that large production potato farms are toxic. Okay, so that's a really good start, but we need a little bit more explanation. What is it that he says about the large production potato farms that make them very toxic? So, the potatoes are constantly sprayed with a chemical that is so, and I don't want to use toxic again because we just used that. So a synonym would be poisonous. That the potatoes must sit in a silo for, how long did he say those potatoes need to sit before we can eat them? So they need to sit for 6 months. 6 months before they can be eaten. Okay. Additionally, so that's a good transition word. Additionally, the chemicals are so toxic that workers cannot enter the fields for how many days does it say? That no one's allowed in the field for 5 days. Cannot enter the fields, E-N-T-E-R, cannot enter the fields for 5 days after the potatoes have been sprayed. Okay, so we have written a gist statement for this, and we've summed up the main ideas. Notice that part of paraphrasing it is not that you're necessarily presenting the information in the same order. I could have put it in the same order as Poland, but in this case I did not. I didn't mention the name of the specific pesticide that's being used. I just summed up the main idea. So let's take a look and read it out loud, because that's part of good writing, is hearing it back and saying, does this sound good? In the potatoes section of the Omnivore's Dilemma, Poland observes that large production potato farms are toxic. The potatoes are constantly sprayed with a chemical that is so poisonous that the potatoes must sit in a silo for 6 months before they can be eaten. Additionally, the chemicals are so toxic that workers cannot enter the fields for 5 days after the potatoes have been sprayed. I'm going to put the word even in here to really emphasize how dangerous that is. That workers cannot even enter the fields for 5 days after, we might even want to change it to safely. Cannot safely enter the fields for 5 days after the potatoes have been sprayed. Okay, I'm feeling pretty satisfied with that gist statement. So this would be a good place for you to pause the video while this is still on the screen so that you can copy it down on your version of the slide. Okay, I'll see you for the next one.